Thank you for joining us in our series of Shiurim on Megillas Esther. For today, I'd like to study with you a beautiful insight into Perek Daled of Megillas Esther. If you have a Megillah in front of you, open to Perek Daled, Pasuk He. The Pasuk says, Vatikro Esther lahassach. Esther summonses one of her ministers, one of her individuals who were appointed, Misarisei hamelech Hashirim midlefoneha, one of those who had been appointed by the king and placed before her to help her, called Hassach. Esther summonses this individual, but Tzaveu al Mordechai, and she orders him, she commands him to go to Mordechai, Lodas mazeh va'al mazeh, to find out what it is that's going on. Mordechai is walking around in the streets. He's rent his garments. He's wearing sackcloth and ashes. He's crying, Ze'oka gedoyla umora, a loud and bitter cry from the depths of his soul. He's in a state that he's not even allowed to enter into the gateway of the king. He's standing in the street. Mordechai is aware of the letters that have been signed by the king and dispersed by Hamman throughout 170 provinces of the entire world, sentencing the entire Jewish people to genocide, Rahman al-Islam. Minar va'ad zoken, old and young, taf and noshim, men, women, and children, b'yoim echad, were to be executed on the 13th day of Adar, the entire Jewish nation in one day. Mordechai is aware of this. Esther apparently at this point is not. So when Esther is told that Mordechai is conducting himself this way, Esther becomes incredibly frightened. She knows something is going on, but she doesn't know what, and she cannot outright go ahead and ask him because Esther is still keeping her identity as a secret. So she finds this individual, Hassach, she summonses him, and she sends him to Mordechai, Lodas mazeh va'al mazeh, what's going on? Vayetze Hassach al Mordechai, so the Sach does this, he goes to Mordechai, to the streets where Mordechai is, and he asks him what's going on. Vayagid loy Mordechai es kol asher korohu, Mordechai tells the Sach everything that happened. And about the money that Hamman paid the king to buy the rights to annihilate the Jewish people. And Mordechai even gives the Sach, Paschegen Aksov, a copy of one of these letters that had been dispersed in Shushan. And he instructs him to take this to Esther and to inform her of what's going on and to command her to go to the king immediately to plead for her people and to beg her husband Achashverosh, the king, the leader of the entire world, to save her nation. Apparently it was at this moment that Mordechai wanted Esther to reveal her identity to the king. So the Sach does. The Sach goes back to Esther and tells her all the words of Mordechai. And Esther tells the Sach, this is a bad idea. She tells the Sach, go tell Mordechai that if I show up to the king uninvited, I will be immediately executed. Everybody knows this. Kol avdei hamelech va'amadinos hamelech, the entire nation, the entire world knows if you show up uninvited, you get immediately killed. Esther says, and I haven't been summoned to the king for 30 days, so surely he's going to call me really soon. I'll just wait till the king calls me and then I'll go. And then I'll tell him who it is that I am. I'll reveal my identity. I'll beg for the well-being of my people, and hopefully the king will have Rahmanis and save us all. I don't want to go uninvited and risk my very life over this. I'll be killed before I get a chance to say a word. Vayagidu leMordechai, says the Torah, Perek Dalet Pasuk Yud Beis, and they told Mordechai the words of Esther, not the Sach. They told Mordechai the words of Esther. Okay. Mordechai, of course, in the end convinces Esther, and Esther goes, and she goes to the king, and the king extends his stick, his staff, which means that Esther wasn't killed, and Esther invites the king, Achashverosh and Hamman, to a party, etc., as you all know. For today, I want to talk about Hassach. This Sach, individual called Hassach, in the English Chumashim, in the English Megillas, they translate him as a chamberlain, an officer. This Sach individual is not mentioned nowhere in the Megillah before this, and nowhere in the Megillah after this. In fact, in the middle of him going back and forth, first from Esther to Mordechai, then from Mordechai back to Esther, when Esther tells him to go back to Mordechai and say she doesn't want to go to the king, the Pasuk does not say that the Sach goes back to Mordechai and tells him that Esther doesn't want to go. It says, Vayagidu, they told Mordechai the words of Esther. The Sach is no longer mentioned anywhere in the story of the Megillah. Not before, not after, very strange. All of a sudden, the Hassach is mentioned 4 or 5 times. He's a very big deal as a messenger between back and forth. Hassach. He tells the Hassach, she tells the Hassach, they command the Hassach, but then at some point, the Hassach is dropped from the conversation, never to be heard from again. Okay. Who's the Hassach? Who's Hassach? The Gemara says very famously, Hassach ze Daniel. It's just like unbelievable. Daniel from the famous Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel from the famous Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. This is the Hassach we're referring to. According to my very humble understanding, Daniel was not younger than Mordechai in the story of the Megillah. So just like Mordechai, the Evan Ezra says when it was in his 90s, Daniel here is in his 90s. And at this point, for some reason, Esther decides to send Daniel to Mordechai to find out what's going on. Mordechai sends him back to Esther to tell her what's going on and to tell her to go to the king. When Esther doesn't want to go, the Hassach Daniel is removed from the conversation. All right. If he really is Daniel, why is he called Hassach? Without getting into too much detail, Rav and Shmuel in the Gemara argue about this. Why is he called Hassach? It has to do with his position in Achashverosh's government, which was either a very high position or a very low position. Either way, again, without getting into it, he really is Daniel. He's called Hassach. Okay. Why does he all of a sudden in the middle get dropped? Why does he all of a sudden in the middle no longer part of it? First he's going back and forth, and then by Agidul Mordechai, other people told Mordechai the words of Esther. Why? The Gemara has a very peculiar explanation for this. The Gemara says, "L'fi she'ein meshivin ala klola." Now what that means, very briefly, is that when you're sent on a mission, you're not supposed to come back with bad news. If the mission fails, you're not supposed to, it's not a good idea to come back and report bad news. So when Mordechai said to Esther, go to the king now, reveal your identity and plead for your people, and Esther says, that's not a good idea, if I go to the king, I'll be killed. At this point, Daniel says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be the one who's going to go back to Mordechai and tell him that Esther doesn't think your plan is a good idea. I don't want to be that guy. So Daniel bows out. And other people have to go back and tell Mordechai that Esther doesn't want to go along with it. The Medrash says, very famously, that the reason why Daniel is dropped from the conversation and other people inform Mordechai that Esther doesn't want to go to the king is because Hamman was watching Daniel go back and forth between first from Esther to Mordechai, and then Mordechai back to Esther. And while Hamman maybe didn't know exactly what it is that was going on between the two of them, Hamman didn't like it. And so Hamman sees Daniel going back and forth. He knows Mordechai is a Jew. He definitely knew Daniel was a Jew. Boatoy, Hamman kicks Daniel, Baharogoy, and kills him. And this, according to the Medrash, was the end of Daniel. So it's not just that he's dropped from the conversation, but actually this was the day he passed. Kicked, literally, by Hamman. Okay. Now I got a couple of questions to ask you. Number one, what's Daniel doing here in the middle of the story of the Megillah? Really? I mean, Daniel was very, very a tremendous part of Jewish history. He was very instrumental in the times of Nebuchadnezzar and the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Daniel, what's he doing in the story of Megillas Esther? The story of Megillas Esther is not about him. It's about Esther and Achashverosh. It's about Mordechai and Esther and all the rest of it. Well, what's Daniel doing here? And why is this relevant? All of a sudden, Daniel comes in here. And in what context does he enter the story of Purim? Daniel. That he was a messenger man, first from Esther to Mordechai, and then from Mordechai back to Esther, and then no more. The whole thing is very strange. Ongechapt, punkt. There's a Yiddish expression, wie is the Yovan reingefallen in the sukkah? It's hard to translate, but it means like, how's the Yovan falling into the sukkah? How's Daniel falling into the story of Megillas Esther all of a sudden? And in such a seemingly strange context, as the mailman, as the messenger boy from Esther to Mordechai and back, then he doesn't want to report back, so he either decides not to or Hamman kills him, and this is the end of it. Daniel, punkt. What's he doing here? Question number one. Question number two, if this really is Daniel, why is he called Hassach? Call him Daniel. You want us to know that he had a high position in the government, a low position in the government, Beseder soll sein. Tell us or don't tell us, but why are we calling him with an... I've never heard of this before. All of a sudden, he's Hassach? Ongechapt. If this is Daniel, so say that this is Daniel. Question number 3. The Gemara says that when Esther tells the Soch, go tell Mordechai that it's not a good idea for me to go to the king. If I go into the king, I'll be executed immediately. I won't even get a chance to say a word. The Gemara says Daniel refuses. He bows out. He says, no, I'm out. I'm not going to tell this to Mordechai. Why? Ein meshiven ala klala. You're not supposed to report bad news. I was sent on a mission by Mordechai. I don't want to be the one to come back and disappoint him and say Esther said no. I don't want to do that. It's got to be the weirdest piece of Gemara. I mean, maybe not the weirdest, but it's going to be a very strange thing for the Gemara to say. Daniel doesn't want to bring back bad news to Mordechai, so therefore he bows out. 1 second. We've just been told, as in the Soch and Esther have just been told, that the Jewish people are facing genocide. They're facing threat of annihilation by the most powerful people in the world, Achashverosh and Hamman. This is not a joke. Achashverosh believes that the way to save them is by Esther going to the king, revealing her identity and pleading on behalf of her people. Esther thinks that's not a bad idea. It's a roll of the dice with her life, and since she is empowered to save the Jews, she doesn't want to roll that dice, so to speak. So she doesn't think it's a good idea. This is a conversation between Esther and Mordechai about how to save the Jews from genocide. Daniel doesn't think that this is important enough to go back to Mordechai and say Esther doesn't think it's a good idea. We either need a new idea or convince Esther that this is a good idea. This doesn't seem like an appropriate time to bow out respectfully because you don't want to come back with bad news. This is the bad news? That Esther doesn't want to go to the king? How about bad news that the Jews have been sentenced to death? How about that for bad news? That Daniel has no problem communicating. But that Esther doesn't want to go to the king now and risk her life because she believes she's in position to save the Jews. Oh, says Esther, this I don't want to do. This is incredibly difficult to understand. Daniel's choice here is difficult to fathom. Now's when you bow out. And the explanation of the Medrash that Hamman killed him is even more difficult to understand. Hamman wants to annihilate every Jew in the world. He's designated a date, the 13th of Adar. He has it written, he has it sealed. Letters have been sent to all 127 provinces in the world, signed with the signature of the king. Haman's got this, so to speak, in the bag. Mordechai made him the most angry. Because of Mordechai, he wants to kill all the Jews. Hamman doesn't touch anybody. The Medrash says he was angry with the children. He wanted to kill the children first. He was furious with everybody. Hamman doesn't lay a finger on a single person. The one Jew that Hamman actually does kill is who? Daniel. Hassach. Why? Because he chapped him, because he caught him going back and forth from Esther to Mordechai. Hamman doesn't even know that Esther's Jewish at this point. All right, he knows that Mordechai is Jewish. He knows Daniel is Jewish. Fine. This he knows. But he doesn't know that Esther is Jewish. But something about Daniel going back and forth between the two of them made him so angry that he was killed by Hamman. Every other Jew can live. Daniel, literally the messenger, the expression in English, kill the messenger, right? In this case, it's literal. Hamman killed. Why? What does all of this mean? And why is the Torah raising it here? And why is this coming up? Why is this important? Okay. Hold on to your heads, my dear friends. Here it comes. To explain this, the commentaries point to a Medrash Rabba in Shir Hashirim. The Medrash Rabba is talking about the time when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash, forced the Jews into Golus, into exile, and erected a giant tselem. Tselem, in Yiddish, when people say tselem, they mean the emblem of a different religion. But that other religion didn't exist at this point in Jewish history. So tselem over here means an idol. Nebuchadnezzar erects an idol of himself. And he forces all the Jewish people to bow down to it. He threatens them, if you don't, I'm going to kill you all. So they all do. All except for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are thrown into the fiery furnace and miraculously saved. Daniel escaped, the commentaries explain. He ran away. But apparently at some point he came back. And when he came back, the Medrash says, a very interesting Medrash. When he came back, the Medrash says, Nebuchadnezzar very much wanted Daniel to bow down to this idol. Says the Medrash, how much Nebuchadnezzar was trying to seduce, to sweet talk Daniel into bowing down to this idol. And Daniel, of course, refused. So the Medrash says something wild. The Medrash says that Nebuchadnezzar said to Daniel, if you allow me to show you what this idol is capable of, you'll bow down to it of your own initiative. You'll want to bow down to this idol. If you'll stand here, just give me an opportunity, said Nebuchadnezzar to Daniel, to show you what this idol is capable of, what this idol can do, and you'll bow down to it on your own. And Daniel gave Nebuchadnezzar a chance, that's what it says in the Medrash, to, so to speak, show off his idol. So he does. Nebuchadnezzar brings a giant orchestra. They camp, they position themselves all around the idol. And they start to play music, beautiful music. Nebuchadnezzar brings a bunch of goyim who worship this idol, and they began to stand there and say words of praise, and as you would say words of praise to a deity, to a god. And then, when after the music played and the people praised the idol, there was a moment of silence. And then the Medrash says, the idol began to speak. And the idol said the words, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem your God. Nu, said Nebuchadnezzar, have I not proved my point? Bow down to it. It's literally a piece of gold, literally standing there and saying, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. Now, how was Nebuchadnezzar able to do that? Explains the Medrash. Medrash says, I'll tell you what he did. Because he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and he was in possession of the kelim, of the vessels, and the garments of the kohanim, etc. Nebuchadnezzar was in possession of Tzitz shel Kohen Gadol, of the tzitz, of the plate that sat on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. On it were the words Kodesh LaHashem. Nebuchadnezzar had taken this tzitz and he had inserted it deep into the mouth of the idol. And by virtue of the name of Hashem, of the tzitz, and the name of Hashem that was on it, that was sitting inside this idol, that's how the idol, with the, so to speak, hijacked koyach of Hashem, was able to miraculously say these three words, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. That's how Nebuchadnezzar was able to do it. Nebuchadnezzar, counting on the fact that he fooled everybody, including Daniel, was hoping that Daniel would also bow down to the idol. Daniel was suspicious. He could tell something was going on. So he asks Nebuchadnezzar for permission to climb up on a ladder and kiss the idol on the mouth. That's what it says in the Medrash. Nebuchadnezzar says, why the mouth? Daniel says, what do you mean? Because that's where all of this amazing stuff is coming from. That's where the idol is talking from. All right, says Nebuchadnezzar. Go ahead. So Daniel climbs the ladder and he gets right in the face of the idol and the tzitz that's buried deep in the idol's mouth. And he talks to the tzitz. And he says, Basar v'dam ani, I am a human being. But shlucha shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu ani, I'm an emissary, I'm a messenger of Hashem. Hizor b'cho, he tells the tzitz, be careful. Shelo yischal b'cho Shem Shemayim, not to make a chilul Hashem. And then Daniel says, V'goyzer ani alecha, I'm commanding upon you, I'm decreeing upon you, that you should extract yourself from the mouth of the idol and give yourself to me. Upon which the tzitz emerges, the tzitz is extracted by Daniel from the mouth of the idol. The Medrash doesn't say what Daniel does with it. I don't know what Daniel does with it exactly, but he removes it from the idol and descends from the ladder. Daniel does this, the Medrash says, as he moves in for the kiss on the idol, which he told Nebuchadnezzar he wanted to do. He says these words. He says, I'm human, I'm an emissary of Hashem, don't make a chilul Hashem, I'm decreeing upon you that you should be extracted, give yourself to me. And the tzitz emerges from the idol and given to Daniel. Daniel climbs down the ladder and he says to Nebuchadnezzar, now try it again. So the orchestra plays and the individuals state their words of praise. And this time the idol is silent. But Oisa Shah concludes the Medrash, at that time, a ruach came, a wind came, knocked down the tzelem, knocked down the idol, the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And that was the end of it. Okay. The Mekubalim add a very interesting nuance to this story. They say that Daniel, while he was up there on the ladder talking to the Tzitz and extracting from it the powers of Kedusha that had been sabotaged, that had been hijacked here to empower this idol, in the end, the Mekubalim say, Daniel uttered 3 words. These 3 words were the final blow that empowered him to remove the Tzitz and take down the idol. What were the 3 words? Koil haneshama tahalal. May every neshama praise Hashem. You see, Daniel was saying, since this idol doesn't have a neshama, since it doesn't have a soul, since it's not a living human being, it doesn't get to stand there and be part of, so to speak, the experience of praising of Hashem. So Daniel said, Koil neshama tal, only something with a neshama praises Hashem, not an idol. And as he said those words, he extracted the tzitz and toppled the idol. In fact, the Mekubalim add, we know, of course, that Hashem has 72 names, Ayin Beis Shemais. The 8th name, which 8 represents higher than nature, 8th name of the 72 names of Hashem is Tov Chof Hei. Acronym, if you switch it around, Koil HaNeshama Tahalo. So this acronym of Hashem, this name of Hashem, Tov Chof Hei, Koil HaNeshama Tahalo, is what Daniel used to extract the tzitz, to topple the idol, and end the Chilul Hashem that was going on. So all the Jews could see, everybody could see, that it wasn't in fact the idol that was talking, but some godly force that was there. All right. In a sefer written by an individual known as the Megalleh Amukos, on the Megalleh Amukos wrote many sforim of Kabbalah. On his matzev, on his headstone, it says that they said about him that he learned Torah with Eliyahu Hanavi. In Megalleh Amukos, the Megalleh Amukos writes about this teaching of the Ari, of the Mekubalim, that Daniel used the name Tov Chof Hei, Koil HaNeshama Tahalal, to extract the tzitz and topple the idol. The Megalleh Amukos writes something unbelievable, mamish mind-boggling. He says, where did this come from? Where did Daniel know this from? He says he knew this from Moshe Rabbeinu. You see, the first thing the Torah tells us about Moshe Rabbeinu, the first time he left the palace, the first thing the Torah tells us when he leaves the palace is that he goes out to his brothers, he sees their suffering, and he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew. All right, the Pasuk says he looks around, he sees Ein Ish, quote, Vayaches HaMitzri, he strikes the Mitzri and buries him in the sand. Next Pasuk, Vayetze Bayoim Hashem, he goes out on the second day, he sees 2 Jews fighting, Vayomer LaRosha, and he says to the Rosha, Lama Sake Reyecha, why are you striking your friend? This is Dosan and Aviram he meets the next day. He says to one who's about to strike the other, Lama Sake Reyecha. And there's a very strange response. Dosan and Aviram, these 2 Jews, they turn to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, who made you Sarva Shoifat Aleinu? Who made you minister and judge over us? Who appointed you? And then they say these words. They say, Halahorgeni ata oimer kasher haraktos hamitzri. Are you, they say to Moshe, he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, are you threatening to kill me like you killed the Mitzri? Halahorgeni ata oimer kasher haraktos hamitzri. Simple pshat. Are you threatening to kill me like you killed the Mitzri? And Moshe Rabbeinu hears this, he becomes terribly afraid. He says, Oy Gewalt, Oche Noida Dover, Oy Gewalt. Apparently it's known that I killed the Mitzri. Moshe Rabbeinu thought nobody knew, or that nobody would say anything, whatever the case may be. Hold on to your heads. On the words Halahorgeni Ata Oimer, Rashi says very famously, that from here we learn Halahorgeni Ata Oimer, that Moshe Rabbeinu killed an Egyptian by using a name of Hashem. Ata Oimer, Moshe Rabbeinu did it with his words. In other words, although the Pasuk says Vayaches HaMitzri, Moshe Rabbeinu struck a Mitzri, it wasn't that he struck him with his hand physically, he struck him verbally. He said a name of Hashem, and that's how he killed the Mitzri. Now, how did Dosan and Aviram know this? Because the Mitzri was beating one of them. So he was there when Moshe Rabbeinu said this name of Hashem. So this is how Moshe Rabbeinu killed him, uttering a name of Hashem. Now, on a simple level, the pshat, when they say to Moshe Rabbeinu, "Are you threatening to kill me like you killed the Egyptian?" They're just being facetious. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do anything that gave them any indication that he wanted to kill them. They were being rude. Right? What are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? They're being sarcastic. Says the Megalleh Amukos, no, they weren't being sarcastic at all. What did Moshe Rabbeinu say to them, say to Dosan and Aviram when he saw them fighting? He said, Lo masake. What's sake? Sake is Tov Chof Hei. Tov Chof Hei, says the Arizal, is the 8th of the 72 names of Hashem that Daniel used to topple the idol. It was the same name of Hashem that Moshe Rabbeinu used to kill the Mitzri. And again, because the Mitzri was beating Dosan, so that's how he knew which name of Hashem Moshe Rabbeinu used. So when Moshe Rabbeinu comes the next day to the Jews, to Dosan and Aviram, and he sees one beating the other, and he says, "Lo masake reyecha," oy gewaltig, mamash panic. They weren't being sarcastic; they were serious. They said, "The last time we heard you use this name of Hashem, somebody ended up dead. You can do the same to us." Halo horgeni ata oimer kaseratos hamitzri. Are you threatening to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? Not just because they were afraid that Moshe Rabbeinu would kill them with the same name of Hashem, because he had used the same name of Hashem, and they knew which name he used. Oy gewalt, says Moshe Rabbeinu. Ochei noida hadover. Apparently the matter is known. Not just that I killed an Egyptian, and not just that I killed an Egyptian with the name of Hashem, but it's even known which name of Hashem I used. This is supposed to remain a secret, says Moshe Rabbeinu. But it wasn't. Dosan heard it. Apparently he related it to Aviram, or whatever the case may be. Explain the Mukabolim, this name, Sake, to strike, that Moshe Rabbeinu used to kill the Egyptian, Vayaches HaMitzri, it's the same word. Vayach, he struck, Sake, Reyach, this name of Hashem, Tov Chafei. This is the name of Hashem that's used to strike, to destroy negativity. This was the same name that Daniel used to try to destroy the Tzelem that was saying, Anochi Hashem Alakecha. And he knew it because he had this tradition. They had this tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu. This is how he became aware. All right. If this is the case, we can go one step further. We now understand on a deeper level why Daniel, the one who took down this idol of Nebuchadnezzar, with this special name of Hashem used by Moshe Rabbeinu, we now understand why he's called Hassach. It wasn't just, again, so the Gemara says, because of his position in government. That's the reason Al-Pi Nigla, it's the reason according to the Gemara. The secrets of Kabbalah are not taught in Gemara. But the Arizal was Megalleh to us that he used the name of Hashem, and the name was Tov Chav Hei. So he's called Hassach because of this same name, because this was the name that he used to topple the very idol that Nebuchadnezzar had forced the entire Jewish nation to worship. When Daniel toppled the idol with this, extracted the tzitz and toppled with this name of Hashem, this is why the Torah refers to him this way, as Hassach, the one who used this name of Hashem to perform this incredible activity. Okay. Let's move on. This idea gives us a really fascinating insight into a passage of Gemara. The Gemara says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is sitting with his students one day. Apparently, they were learning Megillas Esther, or discussing Megillas Esther. And the students asked him a very painful question. Not just a philosophical question, but really a kind of an in-the-gut question. The students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him, what terrible sin, what terrible crime, Rahman al-Islam, did the Jews commit that warranted this decree of Hamman? That was the question. Now you have to understand, the Jews at this point, Baruch Hashem, in the end, are saved. Thank God, which is why it's a Yom Tov. But in terms of the danger, the vulnerability that the Jews faced at the time of the Gzeira, potentially was like nothing else in Jewish history, like very few other moments in Jewish history. Remember, Achashverosh rules the whole world. There's nowhere for the Jews to run. They've all been sentenced to death, to execution, genocide, complete and total. Minar v'adzokin taf enoshim b'yoim echad. And talk about anti-Semitism. The world is ablaze with anti-Semitism. So the students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked, okay, Baruch Hashem, nothing happened in the end, but the sakona, the danger, the gzeira. What terrible sin did the Jews do to warrant this? Like a good teacher, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai challenges the students. He says, no, you ask the question, you give me the answer. What do you think? Well, the students gave the famous answer. They said it was because they enjoyed the meal of Achashverosh. Right? The Rabbi points out very famously. It doesn't just say that they partook of the meal of Achashverosh. It says that they enjoyed it. They enjoyed it. They forgot that the Eibishter was protecting them. They enjoyed a meal a party that was being thrown to celebrate the Beis HaMikdash not being rebuilt. Achashverosh sitting in the garments of the Kohen Gadol, serving food in the Kalim of the Beis HaMikdash, etc., etc. And they enjoyed it. How could they? That was the sin that they'd committed. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that cannot be the explanation. Because that sin was only committed by the Jews in Shushan. And the decree was against the Jews in the entire world. The Medrash says there were 18,500 Jews in Shushan. But the death sentence of Hamman was against everybody. So what was it that they did that deserved this type of a consequence? The students don't know. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, this was because they had bowed down to the idol of Nebuchadnezzar. And then there's 1.5 lines in the Gemara, which is probably one of the most both disturbing and fascinating in 2,500 pages of Shas. The Gemara says that when the students heard Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's answer, that this was because they had bowed down to the idol, the students asked Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, if that's the case, why were the Jews saved? If they committed Avodah Zarah, the punishment is capital punishment. Why were they saved? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai responded, quote, Lo asu elo leponim. Af HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo asu elo leponim. Now the simple meaning of that is that the Jews didn't, when they bowed down to the idol, they didn't mean to bow down to the idol, they were just doing it as a show. They were doing this because they didn't want to die. Nebuchadnezzar said, if you don't bow down to the idol, I'll kill you. So for the sake of saving their own lives, they pretended to bow down to the idol. Although they didn't believe in it, obviously, they were just doing it for show. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai concludes, and the entire story of Purim, the whole Gezerah of Hamman, was also just a show. Hashem never intended to hurt the Jews. It was just to arouse them to do teshuvah, whatever the case may be. Now the simple meaning of the Gemara is very difficult to understand. When we say a Jew is not allowed to bow down to idols, it doesn't matter if he believes in the idol or not. Even if he doesn't believe in the idol, he's still not allowed to bow down to it. There's avodah zarah. Well, what's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saying? Oh, they didn't believe in it. No, and if they don't believe in it, so therefore you're allowed to bow down to it. Besides for the fact that the question the students are asking also needs to be understood. What are they suggesting? That Hashem should have annihilated the entire Jewish nation? It also needs to be understood. But be it as it may, what's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's answer? And because they didn't believe in it, they only bowed down to it. The Jew is obligated to give his life, not to bow down to an idol, even if he doesn't believe in it, Rahman al-Islam. But based on what we're saying now, is a much, much deeper element to it. Of course, when the Jews heard the idol say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, so of course they understood that somehow some koya, some godly energy, something maybe they knew was the tzitz, maybe they didn't know, but definitely some koyach, some energy of kedusha had been hijacked and had somehow been inserted into this idol, and that was the power that was saying Anochi Hashem Elokecha. They knew that in the end this is a koyach of kedusha. Somehow these words are godly words. So when they bowed down to the idol, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying it's not just they didn't believe in the idol. They were bowing down to Hashem. Yes, it's still not allowed because you're still not even allowed to create the impression. You're not even allowed to make it look like you're bowing down to an idol. A Jew's obligated to have Mesiras Nefesh for that too. But in terms of what they were worshipping, what they were bowing down to, when they heard the idol say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, they knew that somehow a koyach of godliness had been hijacked here, and that's what was speaking through the idol. They were bowing down to Hashem. It looked like they were bowing down to the idol, but they were really bowing down to a godly koyach until Daniel removed it. And of course, once Daniel removed it, then the idol fell down and collapsed. Nobody bowed down to it anymore. It was powerless. They understood that there was a godly power inside this idol, and that's in fact what they were bowing down to. Okay. Now the Mekabolim give us one more insight into the Megillas Esther that takes our entire understanding of the Megillah to a whole new level. That takes the whole thing to a whole new world. Mordechai, the Mekabolim teach us, was a Gilgul of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a reincarnation of Moshe Rabbeinu. This, of course, based on the Medrash, Mordechai b'doirei k'Moshe b'doirei. That Mordechai in his generation was like Moshe Rabbeinu in his generation. Mordechai is referred to as Ish Yehudi Hoya b'Shushan Abira. Moshe Rabbeinu is referred to as O Ish Moshe. Ish Mordechai b'doirei k'Moshe b'doirei. Say the Mekabolim, Moshe Rabbeinu was a reincarnation, Mordechai HaTzadik, Mordechai HaYehudi, was a reincarnation, was a Gilguloi Shel Moshe Rabbeinu. Esther Hamalka, Mordechai's niece, cousin, wife, was also a Gilgul. A Gilgul of who? Bas Parai. She was a Gilgul of Basya. Esther was a Gilgul of Basya, the daughter of Parai. What about Hamman? Hamman is also a Gilgul. Hamman is also a reincarnation. Hamman had also been here before. In what form? In his previous lifetime, he was the Mitzri that Moshe Rabbeinu killed. Again, Moshe Rabbeinu is reincarnated into Mordechai. Basya, the one who saved Moshe Rabbeinu, is reincarnated into Esther. And the Mitzri killed by Moshe Rabbeinu is reincarnated into Hamman. Again, Mordechai was Moshe Rabbeinu, Esther was Basya, the daughter of Parai, and Hamman was the Mitzri. This is the reason why one of the first things the Megillah tells us about Esther is Lekocha Mordechai loy labas. Mordechai took Esther labas. Why labas? Because in a previous lifetime she was Basya bas Parai. Ein lo ovoim, the Megillah says. Esther doesn't have a mother and father. Why? Because Basya, the daughter of Parai, converts. Gershon is Garik Gadashanayla Dami. She doesn't halachically have parents. So in her following lifetime, she's orphaned from her father and mother. She's a reincarnation of Basya. And just like in the previous lifetime, Basya had saved Moshe Rabbeinu, retrieved Moshe Rabbeinu. So in the next lifetime, Moshe Rabbeinu, Mordechai saves Esther and retrieves her. Okay. Explain the Mekabolim, this is what's meant by the Megillah when the Megillah says, Vatikro Esther lahasoch vatitzavei ol Mordechai. Esther summonses the soch and sends him to Mordechai. On a simple level, what's going on here? Mordechai knows about the decree and Esther doesn't. Mordechai is walking around in the streets, he's torn his garments, he's wearing sackcloth and ashes, he's crying, the Jewish people have been sentenced to death by Hamman, and we're desperate to do something. On a simple level, Esther knows nothing. On a deeper level, they say, Esther knows everything. Esther knows about the decree, and Esther knows that the decree was orchestrated by Hamman. So when she sees Mordechai in such a state, who does she summons? She summonses Daniel, but the Megillah doesn't call him Daniel. The Megillah calls him Hassach. Why? Because right now, the fact that he is Hassach is more important than the fact that he is Daniel. The fact that he is the icon, the personification of this name of Hashem that was used by Daniel to topple the idol, to extract the tzitz, this is what's relevant now. Esther, who is the reincarnation of the daughter of Parai, and who knows from her previous lifetime that Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Egyptian with this name of Hashem, sends Daniel, who used this name of Hashem to topple the idol, for which the Jewish people are facing this gzeira, back to Mordechai and says, use this name like you did last time, kill Hamman just like you did Vayachas HaMitzri, bury him in the sand, and that'll be the end of it. Vatikro Esther la'asoch vatitzaveu al Mordechai. L'das ma'azeh ve'al ma'azeh. Why are you so upset, Mordechai? Why are you so concerned? A Hamman is threatening you. With one name of Hashem, it's finished. Just like you did last time. Last time you saw the Egyptian, previous lifetime, Moshe Rabbeinu saw the Egyptian. One name of Hashem, Tov Chav Hei Koil HaNeshama Tahalel, Fartik, finished. Only with a Yiddish neshama you can praise Hashem. Says Esther, what are you getting so worked up about? What are you getting so excited? Walking around screaming and crying. Here's Hassach. Yes, he is Daniel, but what's relevant here is that he is Hassach. Say the name of Hashem, finish off with Hamman, just like you did Moshe Rabbeinu in the Mitzri, and it'll be over. And this will be the end of it. This was Esther's intention in sending Daniel to Mordechai. And this is why, in a deeper level, the Megillah calls him Hassach. Now, before I go on, I want to tell you something. I want to add. There's parenthetically, there's another insight here that we have based on what we're teaching. In the end, Mordechai prevails upon Esther to go to the king, and she does. The Gemara says that as she walked into the king, 3 malachim accompanied her. One to hold up her neck because she'd been fasting and davening for 3 days. She was collapsing. One to hold up her neck. One to bring a chut shel chesed, a ray of kindness to shine upon her, so she should find favor in the eyes of Achashverosh. And a third angel to extend Achashverosh's scepter. How far did it have to extend? The Gemara says there's 3 opinions. 12 amas? 12 amas, about 18 feet. 16 amas, about 24 feet, or according to another opinion, 60 amas, 90 feet. Achashverosh extends his scepter. Esther accepts the scepter, her life is saved, she invites Achashverosh and Hamman to a party, etc. In the middle of the discussion about how far Achashverosh's scepter extended to save Esther, the Gemara throws in these couple of words. Quote, V'chein ata moitzei ba'amosa shel bas paroi. And so we found by the Amma of the daughter of Paroi. And you read the Gemara and you're like, we're talking about Esther standing in front of the king and how far the king's scepter extends. Allein gehakt, in the middle of the discussion, now what does the Gemara even mean? So it means that when the daughter of Paroi went into the Nile River to bathe and she saw the basket of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah says, Vatishlach es Amosa. She sent Amosa. What's Amosa? The commentaries say either it means her maidservants to retrieve the basket, or Amosa means her arm. Now, if she sent her arm if she retrieved the basket with her arm, why does it say that she sent her arm? Right? If you're retrieving a cup, if you reach for something, you don't say you send your arm. You don't send your arm. You stretch out your arm if you have to, whatever the case may be. What's she sent her arm? This part is very incredibly famous. It turns out the basket was out of her reach. So she sent her arm to reach something that there was nothing, that was completely out of her reach. Hashem made a miracle. Her arm stretched all the way till it could reach the basket. Now, how far did her arm stretch? So the Gemara is saying, just like over here, you have an opinion when it comes to the scepter of Achashverosh that it extended 60 amas. So the arm of the daughter of Paroi also extended 60 amas, so it was able to reach Moshe Rabbeinu's basket and retrieve it. Now, when you read the Gemara, it's like, okay, cute, I guess. Achashverosh's scepter extends 60 amas, and the daughter of Paroi's arm extends 60 amas. Achashverosh's scepter to save Esther, and the daughter of Paroi's arm to retrieve the basket of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, but what does that mean? But based on what we're saying now, this idea takes on a tremendously powerful spiritual significance. Esther is Gilgula Shel Bas Paroi. She's a reincarnation of the daughter of Paroi. So what the Gemara means on a deeper level is that it was in the Zechus. Since in the previous lifetime, the daughter of Paroi extended her arm. When she was more than 60 amas is 90 feet. She reached out more than 90 feet away to save the basket of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Hashem made a miracle that her arm extended to retrieve it. In the schus of her saving Moshe Rabbeinu in her previous lifetime, now when she goes to Achashverosh, upon the instructions of Mordechai, the scepter of Achashverosh is extended the same length to save Esther as she comes to Achashverosh to plead for her people. It's not just that they were similar in length, but it's also that it was in the zechus of what she had done in her previous lifetime to save Moshe Rabbeinu that she is saved here. Okay. Mordechai apparently refuses. He doesn't want to go about with this method and say this name of Hashem and kill Hamman. No, he says. He sends the soch back to Esther and says, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me which names of Hashem to use. You go to the king, you plead on behalf of the king, and you save the people. Why? It turns out Mordechai has a profound concern. Mordechai says, it's not a good idea for me to just say this name of Hashem and get rid of Hamman. It will work, but it's not a good idea. Why not? Well, two problems. Number one, Hamman isn't really the problem here. Right? Remember, Hamman dies 3 days later, and the Jewish people still deal with a death sentence for another 11 months. Because even after Hamman is dead, the decree remains over the heads of the Jews. So number one, Hamman isn't really the issue here. And number two, says Mordechai to Esther, think about what's going on here. Moshe Rabbeinu strikes the Mitzri with the name of Hashem. Daniel takes the idol down with the same name of Hashem. And Hamman is back. It's like whack-a-mole. We keep slamming this thing down with this divine, with this miraculous name of Hashem, and the clip of the evil keeps coming back. If the solution, says Mordechai, was a name of Hashem, we wouldn't be dealing with Hamman in the first place. You're right, he says to Esther, I used the name of Hashem on him in my previous lifetime. But he's back. If it's back, it means we need a different solution, not a temporary solution. We need a permanent solution. What's the permanent solution? The permanent solution is not some kind of miraculous utterance of a name of Hashem. Go to the king. Now, how's that going to help? Well, what happens when she goes to the king? In brief, she invites the king and Hamman to a party, says the Gemara. Why'd she do that? One of the reasons is because she wanted all the Jewish people to think that they could not rely on her to save them, even though they knew she was Jewish. Esther wanted every Jew in 127 counties to hear that she was sitting at a party with Achashverosh and Hamman, and to say, if that's the case, we cannot rely on her for help. And so we have to daven to Hashem. And they would daven to Hashem. And then they would be aroused with Mesiras Nefesh. And once they would have Mesiras Nefesh, that's going to be the power that's going to destroy Hamman. And destroy Hamman, please God, forever. Mordechai's answer to Esther is, don't tell me to use a magical name of Hashem. Not going to work. Don't tell me to, not magical, chas v'shalom, divine name of Hashem. Go to the king, do what it is that you need to do, have your Mesiras Nefesh that you need to have, and with this will inspire, please God, all the Jewish people to have Mesiras Nefesh. This is not going to happen through a miracle. Purim is not about miracles. This has to take place within the framework of nature. And so he tells Esther to go to the king. Her act of Mesiras Nefesh would inspire the Jews to have Mesiras Nefesh. And this, in fact, is what happened. I believe that this is the deeper meaning of what the Gemara means when the Gemara says, Ein meshivin ala klolo. That when Esther initially doesn't want to go back, doesn't want to go to Achashverosh, she says, I'm risking my life, and she tells the Soch, go back to Mordechai and tell him it's not a good idea. Daniel says, no, I'm not going back. Ein meshivin ala klolo. You don't come back with bad news. What does it mean? I believe on a deeper level what Daniel is saying is that he understands the message of Mordechai. Mordechai is right. While it's true that Daniel is the personification, is a physical embodiment of this divine, outer worldly name of Hashem, Tav Chav Hei, that can destroy any power of negativity, it can only destroy it temporarily. It's like bringing in a strong light into a dark room. It'll banish the darkness from the room as long as the light is there. And once you take away the light, the room is dark again. It's time now not to bring in light from outside. It's time to transform the darkness into light. Daniel says, this is not me. I'm Hassach. I'm Tav Chav Hei. I'm a revelation of godliness that is from out of this world. Esther doesn't want to go to the king. Esther doesn't want to have Mesiras Nefesh. She's insisting that it be done through me, through this divine name, through this miraculous name of Hashem. Says Daniel, no, I'm out. I cannot be part of this anymore. And so he extracts himself, because he sees that as far as in order to enact the victory, the oyer of a simcha that the Jews were going to experience, the salvation that would come about through the Jewish people's Mesiras Nefesh, it wasn't going to be through this divine name of Hashem. It wasn't going to be through him. Ein meshivin ala klola, he says. This klola, This klal of Hamman, this time, I'm not the right meshiv, says Daniel. I'm not the right response. We need a Mesiras Nefesh response. Mesiras Nefesh comes from the Jews themselves, not from some Daniel with a divine letter, with access to a divine spiritual name of Hashem. And maybe this is also even the deeper meaning of what the Medrash says when the Medrash says that Hamman killed Daniel. What does it mean in a spiritual sense that Hamman killed Daniel? That means there's a sense here. There's a realization on behalf of Mordechai and of Daniel that what Daniel represents this time is not enough against Hamman. Again, Moshe Rabbeinu has already used this against the Mitzri. He killed him in a second. He buried him in the sand. But look, Mordechai and Daniel say to each other, look, even though we killed him last time, he's back. That means that somehow the forces of evil represented by Hamman are immune to this type of attack. So I believe, in a spiritual sense, this is what it means. Hamman gives Daniel a kick and kills him, meaning, in this case, they're not going to use this power of Daniel, this shame of Hashem, this Tov Chav Hei, godly force to destroy Hamman, because Hamman is going to be able to survive it, as he did in the past. Instead, they're going to look for something much deeper to finally, for once and for all, truly get rid of Hamman. And the only way in the end, you have to wake up the Pintel Yid, the Etzam and Hashem of every single Yid, and be victorious over it. And by the way, this is relevant to Mordechai too, because without getting too much into it, we keep talking about Daniel in the presence of the idol of Nebuchadnezzar. There was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, right? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were thrown into the fire. Daniel at first ran away, then he came back. He said the name of Hashem, he extracted the tzitz, he toppled the idol, etc. But what about Mordechai? Where's Mordechai in all of this? The Chassam Sofer says Mordechai escaped and didn't come back. Mordechai and Daniel ran away. Daniel at least came back, Mordechai didn't. And this is the reason the Chassam Sofer says why Mordechai knows he has to do tshuva for this, for running away from the idol of Nebuchadnezzar. He keeps coming back to Hamman. He keeps coming back and refusing to bow down to him. He doesn't run away. The Jews said to Mordechai, if you don't want to bow down to Hamman, just run away. Mordechai said, no, I did that last time, and look, we're still here. We're still struggling with this. So he's standing in the presence of Hamman and refusing to bow down to him because he knows we have to access a koyach that the Jewish people have that will, in the end, will put a sof afalas on him, will destroy it completely. And this, of course, in the end, is the power of Mesiras Nefesh within the framework of nature that exists within every single Yid. All right. The Gemara tells a harrowing tale. Not tale, chas v'shalom. The Gemara tells a harrowing episode. Rabbi Akiva was very brutally executed by the Romans. They literally, with hot rakes, they really peeled the flesh off his body. As they were torturing him and butchering him to death, his Talmidim who were standing around could see that Rabbi Akiva was in a tremendous state of simcha. And he said the words, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The last word out of Rabbi Akiva's mouth was Echad. And the Talmidim could tell that Rabbi Akiva was in a tremendous state of joy. And the Talmidim had a hard time with this. They said to Rabbi Akiva, they said to the Rebbe, they said these two words, they said, Ad Kan, to such an extent. You're joyous even at the moment that they're Rahman al-Islam, they're butchering you to death. You're saying Shema Yisrael, we can tell that you're happy. Rabbi Akiva responded very famously, he said, what are you talking about? I've been waiting for this my whole life. On the contrary, I was in pain my whole life. When will I have this opportunity to fulfill? And now I'm doing it. I shouldn't be happy. Say the Mukabalim, there's a deeper pshat here. The Talmidim heard Rabbi Akiva say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and stop at the word Echad. So they cried out, they said, Rebbe, Ad Kan. Here you're stopping? Continue! Say Baruch Shem Kvoid Malchusay Lo'olam Voed, and say V'yohavtas Hashem Elokecha. Why? Because the four words V'yohavtas Hashem Elokecha, the last letters of the words V'yohavto Es is a Tov, Hashem is a Hey, and Elokecha is a Chof. It's the same name of Hashem. V'yohavtas Hashem Elokecha, Tov Chof Hey. Vayachas ha-Mitzri lo mosaker reyecho. The student said to Rabbi Akiva, Zog tov chofei, Rebbe Adkan, don't stop. Say the name of Hashem and you'll destroy these forces of evil that are rising up against you. Like Moshe Rabbeinu struck the Mitzri, it'll be done with. Don't die, they said to Rabbi Akiva. Don't stop at Echad. Save your haftas Hashem alakecha. And Rabbi Akiva said no. Mesiras Nefesh is even, the Mesiras Nefesh of a Yid, like in the story of Purim, is even greater than that. When a Yid displays Mesiras Nefesh, when a Yid is ready to have Mesiras Nefesh, Al Kiddush Hashem, like Rabbi Akiva did, like Esther did, like the Jews in the end did in the story of Purim, they can overcome any force of negativity. May the Rabbanu Shalom help us that we should have no need for Mesiras Nefesh. May there be no more Hammans, and no more Hamasnikas, and no more Amaleks, and no more forces that rise up against us. Should be no more Oimdim Aleinu L'Chalisenu. But this we do learn from the Megillah. This Mordechai and Daniel taught Esther, and through Esther all of Klal Yisrael. Nothing more powerful than the Mesiras Nefesh of a Yid. And when the Yidden wake up together and display their courage and their readiness to have Mesiras Nefesh, nothing can get in our way. And for the Jews there is Oira, V'simcha, V'sosin, V'kor, Amen, Kain Tiyalanu. Have a wonderful Purim.